Well, welcome and good afternoon and good evening, fortunate ones, to this Vesak sermon, where we have Bhante Sujato from Australia with us. Today's session is organized by the Insight Meditation Center located in Sri Jinendra Rama Temple at Bullers Lane, Colombo 7. So the IMC committee and the Dhamma volunteers, with the advice of Bhikkhu Venerable Bambaragama Somratna Thera,
මියුට් කියන එක ආවි දැන්. ඒ කියන්නේ මියුට් කියන්නේ සද්ද නැතුවනේ.
Right, I have muted everybody. Right, so welcome once again. So, like I was saying, today's session is organized by the Insight Meditation Center at Bullers Lane, Colombo 7. So the Insight Meditation Center, with the Dhamma volunteers and the advice of Bhikkhu Venerable Bambaragama Somratna, is dedicated to organizing Dhamma programs and fostering a community of meditation practitioners. So they conduct a variety of programs at the Bullers Lane IMC Center and online as well. Programs such as mind programs for children, these sutra discussions, Abhidhamma studies, and meditation programs, both in Sinhala and English. Also conduct yoga classes and organize and host meditation sessions and Dhamma sermons as a service for devotees on request. You can contact the IMC by calling Sureka on 077-281-500 or Inoka on 077-480-119. Today's session is sponsored by Mr. and Mrs. Upali and Kamala Kaplasena in memory of their beloved, valued parents, departed relatives and friends, and to offer blessings to all beings in these times of pandemic. So before we proceed, I'd like to go through some of our etiquette while we Zoom. So please feel free to turn on your video if possible. It's nice to see many faces during the session. However, do practice mindfulness, especially of your posture. Be seated if possible, and also be mindful of the way you are dressed as well, right? So I know it's to our friends who are joining from Australia, it's a bit late in the evening. Yeah, so just a small note on that. Also be aware of your background as well, right, as you Zoom, right? So all the things technical things in the new normal. And a special request, kindly do abstain from eating during the session, and to keep your mic on mute at all times. So I will control the mics from here, but you have the option of unmuting, but please don't unmute during the session. Do listen attentively, and we will be taking some questions as well from the participants. So do feel free to type in your questions in the chat box in Zoom. If you're joining us on YouTube, you can type your questions in the comment section on YouTube as well. So I hope that was clear. And we'll put some questions as well, so you'll see the questions pop up as they come in. So Ajahn Sujato, as needs no introduction, and but what Thero is mostly concerned and wants to make aware of is Sutra Central, where he wants to make accessible sutras or the Buddha to as many people as possible in many languages. So we do welcome everybody to visit Sutra Central, be very familiar with it. And I know most of you do that. So, and there are lots of new things taking place behind the scenes, especially one of the new features is the voice, sutras in voice, which allows people to listen to the sutras, not only read it, especially anybody who is visually impaired will certainly benefit from that, or even not, you can download the sutras and listen to them, while you're perhaps meditations as well, making it even more accessible. And the number of languages or the translations available is also increasing constantly. So lots of new changes. I really like the new look and at the website. Technologically wise, there's so many changes happening as well. I would like to play a small video from the Sutra Central, and hope everybody enjoys that.
We've all heard of the Buddha, and we know his reputation. He was a man of peace and wisdom. But what do we really know about the Buddha and his teachings? Maybe we've heard some of his ideas and images filtered through the lens of history and tradition. The monkey mind that's calmed in meditation, the raft that's for crossing over, not for holding on, or the handful of leaves in the forest. Where do these teachings come from? How do we know what the Buddha taught? On Sutta Central, you'll find all these teachings and many more. We gather the earliest texts of the Buddhist traditions, show the connections between them, and present them together with translations in the world's languages. Now, for the benefit of all people who wish to learn the Dhamma, Sutta Central is creating a new generation of translations, which are comprehensive, accurate, and approachable. In keeping with ancient Buddhist traditions, we make them freely available for all without copyright restriction. In times of darkness and confusion, we could all do with a little wisdom.
I hope everybody got opportunity to see and listen to that wonderful video. And certainly the sponsors of this evening's Dhamma sermon would like to also suggest that if anybody wishes to make a donation, and actually they recommend that they do make a donation to Sutra Central, and you can do so online. On the Sutra Central site, there's a donation link there, and you can go and click on donate and then make a one-off donation or a monthly stand-in donation as well. Right. So today's Dhamma sermon will be by Bhante Sujato, also known as Ajahn Sujato or Bhikkhu Sujato, and I don't think it needs any introduction. It's very familiar to all of us. Bhante is joining us from Sydney, Australia, where it's, I think, past 9 o'clock in the evening there. So first of all, thank you, Bhante, for joining us, and at this late hour over there for you. The topic which we've discussed to base today's Dhamma sermon on is the new normal and YoNiso Manisikara. So we were discussing with Bhante earlier, and how do we use the Buddha's teachings and also the wisdom of the Buddha Putras who actually practice in this teaching, and how do we use that during these times for the new normal, and especially the topic on the subject on YoNiso Manisikara, like how can we develop that skill and apply that, and help us in this new normal instance. So without further ado, I'm going to do Aradhana Bhante Sujato for the sermon, and Bhante will be speaking for about 1 hour, and thereafter we'll have a half an hour Q&A session at the end of the session. Bhante Sujato.
Thank you so much, Kavi. And just to double check, is the sound okay?
The sound is okay. We can hear you very clearly.
Nice. Good. Well, thank you so much for your very kind introduction and for your support. It's very wonderful to be here. May I first of all begin by saying happy Vesak to everybody. And I'm sure all of you are celebrating Vesak in your own ways. We have many different events and things that we're doing here in Sydney, both formal and informal. But of course, for us, it's the most joyous time of the year to remember the Buddha, to remember his life, and to remember his example and his inspiration. I just would like to just say and thank you, and to acknowledge all of the people who've come and who've joined us. Wonderful to see you all here. I'd like to give a special acknowledgement to the Sangha members who have joined us. I can see Sister Dhammadina, who is here. Welcome. Sorry, I'm just trying to look on the screen. Venerable Shimida, Venerable Dhammaloka. There may be some others. I'm trying not to miss anybody out. But anyway, it's always especially nice for me to see fellow Sangha members joining and listening to Dhamma together. All right, so we're going to talk about what we've come to accept or come to know. Oh, sorry, before I begin, also just a reminder what Kavi said earlier. I personally really appreciate it if you can turn your cameras on and I can see who's there, because I like to know who's there. And Shanti, thank you for that. And I like to, this is the second time that I've seen Shanti today. She came down and ran down the street to bring Pindabata for us when we went for giving dana, because she was afraid she was going to be late. But so yeah, this is the second time that we've seen today. Thank you so much, everybody, for turning on your cameras. And look, it's not that I'm, I like to see who's talking, who's there, and I like to see who's falling asleep, because that's when I know I need to crack some more jokes. Okay, good. So the new normal. So we're living in this time when it's very strange, isn't it? Like how we live these days. And all of this stuff, we're talking about Zoom and all of these things, and where we've all kind of become experts on it, except we're not really experts. Like at the beginning of this session, we're sort of messing around trying to get everything hooked up and put onto YouTube, and it's the same every time. And these things are still clunky and clumsy, and in a way it's magical, right? I mean, it's incredible that we can be here together and share Dhamma across the world like this. But at the same time, you can't help feeling that, well, it's not quite as good as the real thing. And you can't get feeling that we're kind of getting used to a world where things are lesser and not as powerful as they once were. I remember, like as a young monk in Thailand, when I was just staying in the monastery and trying to do my best to practice and study the Dhamma And we'd have Dhamma talks in the evening in the hall at the back of the monastery in Nanachat in northeast Thailand. And to go out there in that evening was such a special occasion. And it was just such a powerful thing, you know. All the monks would gather silently. We would do some bowing, some chanting, and some meditation, and the Ajahn would give a talk. And it was really, you listened so deeply and remembered so well the things that were being said. And it creates this atmosphere and this feeling that I'm afraid poor old Zoom can't quite do the same way, but at least we have it. At least we have something. So, that's we do the best with what we have. I know that Sri Lanka has been suffering a resurgence in COVID recently. I don't know too much about all the details, but just my heart goes out to all of you. And if any of you have any friends or family who are suffering or who are ill, then, you know, please, my heart goes out to you and all of the health workers and the first responders, all of the people who are keeping us safe, and everyone. It's a cost on all of us to be able to deal with this. And, you know, it's a reminder of how important it is for us to all look after each other, because we're not, you know, we can't do this by ourselves, and we can't just, you know, survive as individuals. So I want to talk a little bit about the COVID and about this situation that we've got ourselves into and what it means and how it's going to affect us going forward. One of the like the fundamental, I think for me, one of the fundamental things, most important thing about understanding the nature of this problem is to understand that this problem that we have with COVID and with the pandemic is in fact natural. That, you know, we need to sort of step back. We think of it as a disease, we think of it as a pandemic and so on, but it's just a virus. It's just an organism which just lives in nature. There's nothing strange about it, nothing wrong with it. There's nothing evil about it. It's a part of nature, and COVID deserves to be here just as much as any of us do. There are many viruses, many diseases that are out there in nature, in bats, in different animals, in the jungle, in the forest. Here in Sydney, we have huge colonies of fruit bats. Even just near where we are in Parramatta, just a 20 minutes walk from where we are, there's bush which is like tens of thousands of these fruit bats which are roosting there. And it's natural, of course, these animals have different diseases and so on, and they can be communicated to humans. But of course, the reality is that those animals and the diseases in those animals are just sitting there getting on with their life. They're not thinking, how can we hatch this evil plan to decimate humanity? They're not thinking that how can we hurt as many people as we can? How can we kill as many people as we can? They're just living creatures just like us who just want to live. And we, human beings, we went in there and messed it up. Unfortunately, we chopped down the forest. We went in there and, we don't know exactly the cause. I mean, there are different theories about the causes of it, but we know that whatever the cause and the original transmission of the COVID was, it came from some kind of animal source, and that came from humans interfering in the natural world. And people know this. We've had pandemics before, SARS and MERS and all of these different kinds of things. And people have been warning about this for years and years and years, that this is going to happen. And it's not, the particulars of it are an accident. There's something that can't be predicted. The general idea is something that can be well predicted and has been well predicted for a long time. thing that that prediction then tells us is that this won't be the last. This is not just, it's not just something that just happens. This is something which is a consequence of the way that we are living on this world. And we are living a life out of balance. Many years ago, when I was a student in Australia, I watched a film that really influenced me and shaped my life, a film called Manisikara. If you ever get a chance to see it, you should. It's mostly just images and music. And it tells the story of what that phrase is. Manisikara means life lived out of balance. And there is a way that nature has, and there is a sense of balance and contentment. And we have upset that. We have chopped down too many forests. We've dug up too much coal. We've burnt too much fossil fuels. We've just done too much too quickly without concern for the consequences. And these are those consequences coming back to us. COVID, climate change, plastic pollution, all of these things. This is a result of how we have chosen to live. What does that mean for us going forward? What kinds of choices can we make in the future? How can we do better next time? Well, none of these have clear answers because we've never been in this situation before. At the moment, it looks like Sri Lanka is suffering from the COVID because many new cases every day and many deaths. And it looks like Australia is doing very well because we don't have any COVID and we don't have any deaths, virtually none. A couple of cases down in Victoria recently. But they're also saying that Australia, if we're going to keep the current policy, might have to stay isolated for decades rather than years. This is what the word from the Australian Medical Authority recently said. There's no obvious path forward and there's no easy way out. And yet here we are. We have to somehow try to understand what the causes of the thing are and how to get beyond it. Now, one of the characteristics of the Buddha's teachings is that the Buddha always focused on causes rather than symptoms. Now, that's not to say, of course, that you shouldn't concern yourself with symptoms. I mean, we have to treat the symptoms. We have to treat things that go wrong as they happen. But we need to look at the causes. And this is what the Buddha called YoNiso Manisikara. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about this word YoNiso Manisikara and delving a little bit into the etymology and the usage of it in the Buddhist tradition. And then I'm going to kind of circle back to see how that might be relevant in the current case of dealing with the COVID crisis and dealing with how we are to live in this day with the new normal. So the word YoNiso Manisikara is, technically is comprised of three elements. YoNiso means according to the yoni, which is the womb, or the cause or the source. Manas is the mind. In this case, it has an active sense of mind. And Manisikara is the action or the doing of the mind. The kara is from the root karoti, meaning to do. So YoNiso Manisikara, Ajahn Brahm used to translate it as the work of the mind that goes back to the source, which is, I don't know if you can use that as an actual translation, but a few too many words in there, but it gives you a good idea of what it means. It means using your mind, directing your mind to go back and look at the sources of things. Curiously enough, that phrase YoNiso Manisikara seems to be a peculiarly Buddhist phrase. This is unlike most of the phrases we find in the Buddhist terminology, which we also find used in other Indian scriptures, in Jaina scriptures or Hindu scriptures or something. I mean, you don't find all of them, but a lot of the phrases that we find that we're familiar with in Buddhism, we also find used in other religions and other texts. It's the normal thing. But YoNiso Manisikara, so far as I can tell, seems to have been a new phrase invented by the Buddha himself, and one that's very characteristic of his own teaching. And of course, we know that that investigation into causes was one of the things that the Buddha himself identified as the key facet of his teaching. For example, in the short message by Venerable Asaji, when asked by Venerable Sariputta as to what is the essence of the Buddha's teachings, and he answered that it's about causality. It's about things that arise according to their causes and their cessation as well. So YoNiso Manisikara is how we use our mind to investigate and look into these causes. Where do things come from? Why are things the way that they are? Now, that work, that application of the mind happens at many different levels and in many different ways. So we can apply it in terms of like research into a particular topic, thinking about things, looking at underlying reasons, delving into different theories of causes and things and so on. And that's a particular application of YoNiso Manisikara. We can also use it in a more internal way in terms of our own inner experience. And particularly in insight meditation, vipassana meditation, YoNiso Manisikara is that direction of the mind, that pointing of the mind to what lies underneath things. When we sit to meditate, if you sit to, you might feel a feeling. There's like a pain in my back. I can feel a feeling, or I'm thinking a thought. And these are like the surface of events. Right? These are kind of bubbling around on the surface. A memory, a perception, a thought, an emotion. And we can see when we're practicing meditation, the initial training in mindfulness meditation leads us to a more clear vision of these things as they're occurring. But as the mindfulness becomes deeper, and as the more still, we start to see underneath the surface, and we start to see where is that place where thoughts arise from? Where is that place that emotions arise from? And we can start to see almost like before the thought, we can see the thought forming itself, gathering itself. We can see that underneath that thought, or underneath that memory, or underneath that emotion, there's something. There's something that moves. There's something that creates a disequilibrium. The Buddha used this simile of the mind like a pool of water. Yeah. Very beautiful and very powerful simile of the mind, like a pool of water. And so normally when we look at a pool of water, we see the reflections on the surface. We see the movement of the surface. But underneath, welling up from underneath, what is that? What is that that creates that energy? Not just when we're reacting to things. Yeah. So in meditation, when we become more and more peaceful, we become less reactive to external things, right? When we first become to meditate, we're hearing things, we're seeing things, we're distracted. And so the longer we go, the more internal we become. And so the disturbances are not so much the sounds that we hear from outside or the things that are impinging on us, but the things coming from within. And what are those things? Where is that? What is that moves from the heart and creates that disequilibrium, creates that tension, creates that movement, that energy? And if we look closely enough, we see underneath that is desire. It's desire that makes all of those things happening. It's our own craving, our own attachment. And this is coming up from such a deep level, from such a subtle level, that we never ever see it unless we are very, very still. And desire is such a funny thing because it's so small, it hardly even exists. And when you're sitting in meditation, you feel this desire for something. You feel, oh, mind inclines in some direction. You feel, oh, this thing. You don't really feel it. You don't really see it because you get caught up in the symptoms of it right away. You get distracted by the externalities of the desire. You know, maybe you're sitting there thinking about food, and you know there's a craving for food that comes up, and but very quickly your mind it's on the food itself, it's on the taste, so you don't see the desire that's made you think about that food. So YoNiso Manisikara is the one that keeps on looking inwards. It keeps on going further, digging further down, digging further down, digging further down. And you see, what is that desire like? And it's such a small thing. It's so innocent. I just want this. That's all. What's wrong with that? It's okay, isn't it? I just want that thing. It doesn't feel like there's anything bad. It doesn't. It's just natural. It's just how I am. And yet that desire, which is so small, so natural, so much a part of who we are, is the root of all of this suffering. That's what all of this comes from. And the trick that desire plays is to hide itself. It hides itself, and that's what moha is for. Right? Moha is delusion. So the purpose of moha is to hide our desires. So it gets in there and twists the world around and twists how we think and twists how our perception goes. So we can't really see what's going on, and we can't really see how we're actually driving this from what's inside us. So YoNiso Manisikara is not satisfied with what's happening on the surface. It's not distracted by all of the shiny things. It's not going chasing after this and wondering about that. YoNiso Manisikara keeps on digging down. Digging down, digging down, digging down, digging down. One of the most characteristic uses of the word is in dependent origination. And the Buddha is talking about each of the factors in dependent origination, saying through YoNiso Manisikara, I saw that this craving was there. I saw how these senses arise. I saw these things, and I kept on going back and back and back, looking, investigating what's the cause of that? What's the reason for it? Why is that like it is? So this idea of YoNiso Manisikara, and like I said, like it can be used in many different ways. And I've only talked about a couple of the different contexts in which it appears in the suttas. But of course, there are many contexts. But they always have this sort of root underlying idea that it means some kind of investigation or inquiry into the causes of things. I might add that I think, I'm not really sure, but I think that there's a tendency in later Buddhism where YoNiso Manisikara the meaning became a bit more general, and it was used a little bit more just in the sense of just reflection or wise reflection. Bhikkhu Bodhi translates it. So it loses that sense of inquiry into causality, I think, a little bit over time. Actually, it's hard to translate it in that way. I think I translated it as like proper attention or something like that. It's actually difficult to translate in English to bring out that causal implication of it. But I believe that that's there certainly in the suttas, in the way that it's used. So we don't remain content with the surface of things, but we inquire more deeply to see what lies underneath. And that inquiry takes time, and it takes care. And it's not something that can be just handed to you on a platter. And when, you know, when we're listening to this, and when we're hearing a Dhamma talk about this, we hear about it at a certain level, and we can understand it at a certain level. But when we actually see it in meditation, it's something else altogether. I can still remember in my mind very vividly and very clearly the first time that I really saw craving in my meditation. And it was almost shocking. It's like this revelation, oh, there's this thing inside me. And you can see it coming out, this force. And it has this kind of, I don't know how to describe it, almost this liquid strength to it. It's like the ocean, you know, it's like it's soft and there's nothing to it, but it's so incredibly powerful and will just drag you under and drag you out without you even noticing. So that craving, and our inquiry is there to uncover that and to go deeper and deeper and deeper to uncover the source of the craving. And so that is what unveils the darkness of ignorance, is YoNiso Manisikara. Now, I mentioned before, to come back to COVID and the new normal, I mentioned before how the cause of this, the root cause of this, is our unbalancing of nature. Yeah, our living our lives out of balance. And I don't know how much you want me to talk about this. Hopefully for most of you, I'm guessing, you're probably well aware of it. And, you know, the fact of the out of balance of the world is probably really obvious to many of you. And I think that it's one of the things that actually is so obvious, but like it's obvious to everyone except for the people around us. I think we've become acculturated and conditioned to this view, which anybody else from any other time or place in human history, if they were to be plonked down here, they would be like, what are you people doing? This is so crazy. And one of the moments that I remember is when I was a kid growing up in Perth, and I had a nice childhood in Perth. We had a nice house, and you know, everything was fine. In those days in WA, the community was much less diverse than it is today. There was mostly white people there, which meant that the food was very boring. But apart from that, we didn't notice it. That's what we were used to. My mum tells the story of like when they discovered zucchini. That was like the exotic fruit. That was the exotic vegetable discovered at one point. And for us to go to a Chinese restaurant was something that was really special. That was wow, it's amazing. But, you know, it was nice. You know, it was a peaceful place. It was prosperous. The weather is good and all of those things. I remember when I was a kid, I used to go and stay. My sister and I used to go and stay with our grandparents sometimes and just spend the weekend there and give our parents a bit of a break, I guess. We didn't think of it like that, but I guess that's how they would have thought of it. And have some fun with our grandparents' house. And I remember my grandfather actually was one of the first people in WA who installed a solar hot water system on his roof. And, you know, my grandfather was not a kind of greenie or progressive or anything like that. But, you know, he knew that it was good if they can heat the water from the sun. This is a good thing. And I remember when I was, you know, in my teens and I started shaving, and my grandmother saw that I had a disposable razor. I guess Mum had given me a disposable razor or something. I don't know where I got it from. And when she saw this disposable razor, she just like shook her head and said, I don't like those things. Oh, why not? She said, because they're so wasteful. She said, when we had razors, we would just sharpen it and just use it again. You wouldn't throw the whole thing away. And such a small detail. And for us, I mean, it's nothing. right? I mean, hardly anybody would think that a disposable razor is an issue. And, you know, I'm a greenie. I use disposable razors. I'm worse than my grandmother was. And most people, you wouldn't, it's such a, compared to all of the other things that we do, then that's such a small thing. And yet to her, that's already so wasteful and so unnecessary. And to me, that really sort of tells us something quite deep about human culture. You know, my grandmother, of course, had her own set of conditioning. I mean, my mother was born just before World War II. So, you know, they went through difficult times and so on there. And, you know, they worked hard and had a prosperous life towards the end of their life. But, you know, they went through their own difficulties, and they learned about the importance of being content, being frugal, looking after things. These are not new values, is the point that I'm making. These are old values. These are normal values. This is what everybody does. Everybody, all human culture, all across the world for thousands of years, that's what people do. They use simple things and they try to make use of them for the best, and they don't just throw things away because they're not going to need them anymore. A number of years ago, before I became a monk, I spent a little bit of time in Central Australia with my good friend Thisbe, and we went for a drive to see an old Aboriginal campsite. And it was a place where the Aboriginal people used to gather and so on in the middle of the desert there. And on the ground is scattered all of these stone tools, like hundreds of them, right? Grinding stones and things like that. And we were just sort of wandering around and looking at them and so on, occasionally picking up a tool and having a look at it. And Thisbe noticed that on the ground there was they have there's like a disc with a smooth surface for grinding up maybe seeds or something like that. And there was one, and it was broken. And like a couple of meters away, there was the other half of it, also broken. And we put them back together, and this was the one grinding stone. And you can imagine that, you know, maybe thousands of years ago, there'd been this Aboriginal auntie who'd been sitting there beside the fireplace, grinding up some seeds to make some food for the meal for her family. And then hit it too hard, broke the stone. You can imagine that you might use these grinding stones for hundreds of years. And then if it's broken, okay, I have to discard it and get a new one. But it just showed me like that. I don't know how old that is, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, who knows? And these things are still there, and they're actually still useful. So we've acculturated ourselves to live in this world of consumption, of disposability, of materialism. This idea that we can and should have everything that we want. And that if we have to pay the cost of that there's something wrong. That we should be able to have a newer, better, shinier technology so that we can have everything that we want and never have to pay the cost. But the problem is, of course, that that's just not how the world works. There's always a cost. And if we allow our desire to go and to be amplified and to be untrammeled and unrestricted, then that desire will create consequences. No doubt about that whatsoever. A number of years ago, I was in Vienna, and I was at a Religions for Peace, an interfaith conference for Religions for Peace. And one of the panels that I attended was a panel on climate change. And there was a gentleman who was speaking there. I didn't know him, and the people from all different kinds of backgrounds were speaking at that panel. And he spoke a few words and so on about climate change and about different issues. And one of the things that he then mentioned was the word, he said, we all have to consider what we call nekama. And he used the Pali word, nekama. And that's how I knew that he was a Buddhist. I didn't know he was a Buddhist before then. Nekkhamma. And nekkhamma means renunciation. It means giving up. And nekkhamma is one of those things which is actually part of the Noble Eightfold Path. It's part of Sammasankappa, of the Noble Eightfold Path. And yet for often, we seem to think that nekkhamma is something for the monks and nuns that should be giving up, but not for, not for the rest of us, maybe so much. And the point that he made was, I think, a very powerful point, is that we've reached a point in our lives where we have to consider that giving things up is not an option anymore, that we're going to have to get used to it, that we're going to have to get used to a world where we're going to have less in the future than we had in the past. And our COVID pandemic is a great example of that. And we've all had to give up so very much. And I'm sure that everyone, or virtually everyone on this chat, has given up their activities. They've given up getting together with friends and with family. I'm sure people have been separated from their family if their parents or if their children are sick or unwell, being able to get home to see them, to be able to do simple things like going to the temple, to be able to all of the kinds of things that we used to just take for granted. In Australia, we have been very lucky so far, lucky or well managed or whatever, but we've had very few COVID cases and the lockdowns have mostly been fairly mild. And so we have coped okay, but there's a huge cost. There's many things that we've had to leave behind. This is nekkhamma. And the point that he was making in that talk was that this is not going to be something that's optional. We're not going to have the choice, but what we do have a choice about is how we go about it. Do we say, you can have my shiny things over my dead body, and I will fight kicking and screaming for my right to have all of my things? Do I drive my Porsche around with this bumper sticker that says, whoever dies with the most toys wins? Or do I realize that there is actually something more to life? And I should actually say that I'm not Porsche shaming here. If somebody does have a Porsche, I saw a study some time ago saying that, in fact, Porsche was the motor car brand that had the lowest lifetime carbon emissions out of any brand of car. So there you go. I'm not trying to Porsche shame anybody. The reason being that people keep their Porsches on the road, and much of the emissions from a car is in the manufacture. So there you go. Where was I? Porsche's most toys wins. Right. So are we going to have our toys taken away from us? Or are we going to say mindfully and with wisdom, what is it that matters to us? Because the reality is that most of us have a lot of things, and most of those things don't matter all that much. I'd never had, I never had all of that much in my that I own. I had even less. These days, now that I'm here in Harris Park, I've been staying here in a settled location for the last couple of years. We have a few more things, but not all that much. And if you're not sure about that, you can ask Deepika and Radha. They helped to set up our place, and there's not much here, and we can get by just fine. Actually, a number of years ago when I arrived to give a talk in Vienna, and I got off the plane, and the lovely Esther, one of the great supporter dayikas there, met me off the plane, and she said, she saw that I was only carrying my bag and my bowl. And she said, oh, it must be really nice to be a monk, to be traveling so lightly and to bringing so few things with you. And I said to her, no, you don't understand. This is not what I'm traveling with. This is everything that I own. This little bag and this bowl, that's it. That's all I've got. And the crazy thing is, half of those things I didn't really need. And look, I'm well aware that I can do that because as a monk, when I travel somewhere, there are kind people and they'll take me in and they'll look after me. I know that. I don't have to take my supplies of food or whatever because people will feed me. And so I'm dependent on the kindness of others. But of course, we all are. And the kindness of others and the kindness that we can show each other is the key to all of this. It's not easy to give things up. It's not easy to know that the things that we've enjoyed and that we've taken for granted, that we'll have to let go of those things. We'll all have to adjust. But if we look out for each other, if we take care of each other, if we remember that the purpose of our Dhamma practice is not just for our own selfish interest, but it's to look after everybody, to support each other, then it will be possible. We can adapt. Humans are really good at adapting. We can adapt. But specifically, I want to emphasize that for us, for the people who are watching this Dhamma talk, for the people who hopefully are going along to the Insight Meditation Center and doing some practice, if you're there in Colombo, or if you're somewhere else, doing some practice somewhere else. Those of us who have the joyous good fortune to have encountered the Dhamma in the world, I mean, my goodness, what a blessing that is. And those of us who have the opportunity to have time to meditate and to practice, let's not forget that we have something to give to so many others. And we might be struggling and we might find it difficult, but those who have no meditation, those who have no value, those who have no Dhamma, they're struggling a whole lot more. Yeah, I'm not saying this so that we should be conceited about it or anything like that. I'm just saying we have that support of the Dhamma. And so I think it's really important that we also look out for others and that we don't be afraid to support people in our neighborhood, but support people who are going through difficulties, because there are all kinds of difficulties which are happening, which we may not be aware of. And there may be domestic violence happening. There may be people who have like mental illness or psychological disorders, stuck in a place home alone. There may be people who are just feeling like a sense of loneliness and loss of purpose. There are so many kinds of things that can be happening and are happening all around us, and yet we don't see it. So I think it's really important for us as Dhamma practitioners to recognize that we have some foundation to reach out to others, to support them and to help them. That's one way that we can be a source of blessing and joy for the world. All right, so this is my talk for this evening on the new normal in YoNiso Manisikara. Now, I believe we have some questions in the chat. Seems to be 7 questions in the chat. That seems fairly good, fairly reasonable. Let me just see if I can put this chat in the right place. Always on visible workspace. No. Sorry, just trying to make it go to where I want it to be, but that doesn't seem to be happening. Fine. Oh, there we go. All right, good. Excellent. So, oh yeah, so Kavi has given the link to Koyana Skatsi. Oh, good to see that it's still around. Oh, there's even a website for it. It's a long time ago that I saw it. I still have images from it in my mind. Yeah, it was a really powerful experience for me. The music, incidentally, I didn't know this at the time, but the music for it was written by Philip Glass, who was a very famous modern Buddhist composer in America. And a lot of his musical style was inspired by his Buddhist ideas of like simplicity and balance and so on. All right. Okay, so we've got a message of congratulations from Anagarika Dhamalata. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much. Another sadhu from Kumar. Oh, this is a good. Well, it's not so many questions, more just sadhus. Oh, well, that's fine. I don't mind that. I can always do with some more. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Giving up isn't an option anymore. Yes. All right. Okay, so finally we got a question from Hashini. Hope I'm pronouncing the name correctly. Venerable Sir. All right. I have this question about how to maintain YoNiso Manisikara when we are multitasking. Right. I understand we're doing one thing at any given moment. But in a given time period, even 5 minutes time period, we're engaging in so many things. During meditation, it's relatively easy to concentrate. Relatively being the operative word there, but not the other way around. Can you please explain how can we incorporate the practice to our day-to-day lives? Okay, well, first thing is that we have to just remember that there is context. There is a context for different different things are applicable in different times in different places. And when I was staying at the monastery in Thailand, monastery of called Wat Bunyawat of Tanjan Dan, there's a Tanjan Dan, I think it is. Sorry, this is my inner linguist pops in, and I want to get the tones right. So Dan, I believe. Anyway, so he. Everything in that monastery was sort of very kind of nicely organized. And so I came even as a guest monk, and then I was asked to do some various jobs. And one of the jobs that they always used to get the Western monks to do was sweeping the main road, because we were big and tall. And so they made these like super long brooms with long handles and really long brushes on them. And we would go down there, and you do this kind of huge kind of sweeping motion where you'd go like basically the whole road at one time. Because often, like in forest monasteries, because you have a road people come and drive in, and it's in the forest, so there's lots of leaves falling every day, but the road is long because it's there's a long way in. So you want to get it done efficiently. So there'd be a few of us would get these really long brooms and be down there doing these kind of huge, grand sweeping movements and clearing that road. And then my second job for the chores period would be to clean the Buddha shrine in the main hall. And for that, they had all of these very kind of delicate little cloths and little feather dusters. And, they wanted to make sure that, you didn't use, like if you're using like a floor, say a rag for wiping the floor, that you shouldn't use that same rag for wiping the Buddha, for example. And they even had, and I'm not kidding, but they even had a special feather duster that was labeled for the Buddha's bottom. So when you're dusting the Buddha Rupa, you had a special feather duster for dusting the Buddha's bottom. And to me, that was kind of a nice reflection that there were these two different tasks, and they're two different tools, which were both very appropriate for those different tasks. And if I'd taken a feather duster to the road, it would have been a disaster. And if I'd taken the big broom to the Buddha image, it would be an even bigger disaster. But they're appropriate in those different circumstances. So it's the same thing when you're meditating, then that's like cleaning the Buddha Rupa. And you have your very subtle tools, right? You have your very refined feather dusters and your very refined things, because you're dealing with like these little glass stupas and these kinds of things. And so you're working in a very refined way in your mind. And when you're outside of that context, you can't work in such a refined way. And it's a mistake to try to do that. And that's what causes a lot of that tension. So you have to focus on what are the things that matter in that particular context. So, for example, so you're talking about when you're kind of multitasking, when you're not specifically talking about at work, but obviously that's being one of the cases where that happens when you're at work. So one of the things to bear in mind here is that when you're at work, your primary thing that you're doing is right livelihood of the Noble Eightfold Path. Not the primary thing you're doing is right mindfulness. That's when you're meditating. The primary thing you're doing is right livelihood. And so you should focus on that. And what that means is doing a job that is meaningful. It means being honest in your work. It means paying attention to the quality of your work. It means treating your colleagues with kindness and respect and dignity. It means being a good employee or a good boss or whatever it is that you're doing. This is your right livelihood. And when you're at work, that's what you need to be focusing on. Now, when you're doing that, it's true, things can be very distracting and you want to simplify it. Yeah, that's fine. And you should, you know, if you can do that to whatever extent you can, then that's great. But you're not going to be able to use the same level of mindfulness and inquiry as you could in meditation. So don't worry about it. Right? The Buddha didn't expect you to do this. Yeah? He gave you different tools for those different contexts. So when you're at work, yes, if you can try to ground yourself in mindfulness, this is good. And every so often, take a little bit of a break, breathe. Yeah? That's good. If you can simplify your life so you can focus on one task at a time, this is good. But don't worry too much about it. The main thing you need to focus on is just getting that right livelihood done. And when you've done that and you go home, then you can say to yourself, I did a good job. I helped people today. I was kind to that person. The customer needed this and I gave it to them. Yeah, my boss wanted this and I did that work. This is your right livelihood, and this is one of the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, and it's equally as important as any of the other factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. And that should give us joy, and that joy should enable us to meditate and to find peace in our meditation. And when we have that peace, then we can see clearly with the YoNiso Manisikara. All right, so Samantha asks, what's the difference between YoNiso Manisikara and Sampajanya? Okay, also good question. Now these, of course, are two terms which are very familiar in Buddhism and which, two of the main technical terms in Buddhism. And I just remark how interesting it is that we have this very detailed and precise and technical vocabulary talking about psychology and the psychology of reflection. And this is really remarkable. I don't think that, we certainly when I grew up as a Catholic, we never had anything even vaguely like that. So these terms of how to look at the mind and how to understand the mind in these different ways, this was not something that we were taught at all. And so the Buddha gave us this vocabulary for that can clarify and help for us to understand our own minds and how our own minds work. Right? So this is one of and I think that the Buddha was really the first who did this in this very kind of clear way. So we have YoNiso Manisikara, which as I've mentioned before is about, it's an aspect of the mind or a quality of the mind that is looking back into the source of things. So I think it's worth noting that when we talk about YoNiso Manisikara, it's not like a thing, right? It's not like there's just one thing which is YoNiso Manisikara. The Buddha's talking about how the mind works, and how the mind works is complex, and it does all kinds of different things. But we can identify and understand that there is a certain way that we can use our mind that's going to look into the sources of things. And this is what the Buddha was referring to when he talked about YoNiso Manisikara. Sampajanya is a slightly different quality, although not completely different. It's certainly overlapping. Both of them are qualities which are on the side of wisdom. So we have, in Pali, we have the word panya, which is wisdom, is probably the most general term for wisdom, or jnana, knowledge, and many terms, so many terms for wisdom and knowledge in Buddhism. And they're all kind of part of a similar spectrum of meaning, but they also might have certain specific technical nuances to them. So that, on the one hand, they're similar in meaning, but they're also a little bit different. So Sampajanya tends to be used in a context where it's talking about your overall situational or contextual awareness. So Sampajanya is your knowledge of what is around you and your understanding of how you're acting within that context. So Sampajanya is most characteristically used in the context of where, say, a monk is going into that town for alms, when they're walking along, being aware, when they're looking to the front or the side, being aware, and putting on their robes and being aware, and so on. And so this is part of a context of meaning, which is which we are performing. And I think this is what really Sampajanya is about. What I mean when I say that this is a context of meaning is that process of putting on the robe, taking up the bowl, walking into town for alms, gathering the meal, coming back, eating the meal, and so all of that thing, that's not just something random that happens. It's part of your life, and it has meaning within your life. And so Sampajanya is about also understanding the purpose of this. It's about understanding what it is that you're doing. For a monk to be walking into the town for alms, then there are distractions, right? There are shiny things that you might get distracted by. When I come into town here in Wigram Street, there is a fellow who sometimes parks this very, very nice, like 1950s Ford Thunderbird car, which I look at and I think, oh, that's a nice car. And so there's things that there's things that you have to be mindful of. Oh, okay. And but then there are also things which you bear in mind the purpose of what you're doing. Like, when we're going for alms round, that we are there to receive the donations, which have been very kindly prepared and gifted by the lay folks. So this is our obligation and our duty to receive these with gratitude and with care, and to make sure that the donations are used properly. So this also is part of that Sampajanya. So it's not just about being mindful, one step goes after the other, but it's also about understanding what is the context that you're in. And so part of that comes to a similar point as YoNiso Manisikara, because it's also looking at what is the reason, what is the point of it. So why do I go into town for alms? Well, I go there because I need to eat. Why do I need to eat? Because I need to sustain my body. Why do I need to sustain my body? Well, ultimately, so I can do my Dhamma practice. So Sampajanya kind of overlaps with YoNiso Manisikara, but YoNiso Manisikara is maybe a little bit more specialized in its application. Yeah? But there is that kind of an overlap. And I should say that Sampajanya itself is also used in other contexts. I don't mean to imply that it's only used in that context, but that's certainly a common context in which it's used. All right. And Dhamma Vichaya. Oh my goodness. So now we have Dhamma Vichaya as well. Okay. Well, like I said, that there are so many of these terms about dealing with wisdom in Buddhism. I mean, really, there's a lot. I don't know if anybody's made a list, but there must be dozens, and not of just different words as well as different senses of words. But yes, Dhamma Vichaya is another one, and Dhamma Vichaya again is a more or less synonym of wisdom, but used in a particular context. Vichaya means to investigate or inquire. Dhamma means, well, I'm sure you know, Dhamma has lots and lots of different meanings. And in this particular context, Dhamma can have two meanings, and it can mean either the teachings of the Buddha, or it can mean the phenomena that we're experiencing in meditation. All right. So you can say, well, the teachings of the Buddha which are describing the phenomena you're experiencing in meditation. So Dhammavichaya, in terms of the teachings, is to recollect the teachings that you've heard. So I'm sure, hopefully you'll be doing this. So hopefully you'll remember something of the teaching that you've learnt this evening, and bear it in mind. And the Buddha said to bear it in mind, you know, not just to forget it and not just to treat it as something random, but also to revise it and go over it in your mind. And this is something which is a really effective learning tool. During the talk and at the end of the talk, just remind yourself, what were the main things that were talked about there? Just remind yourself, what are like 3 or 4 major topics that we discussed? And if you go over that once or twice in your mind, you'll have a much stronger retention of what was happening. It doesn't take long, but just to say, oh, hang on, what did we talk about? Ah, yeah, we talked about COVID. We talked about the disease as being a part of nature. We talked about life going out of balance. We talked about a way of trying to find more of a balance through the Buddha's teachings. We talked about YoNiso Manisikara as being an investigation to the source of things. We talked about that in terms of the source of things, both externally and internally. We talked about how in meditation, we can look into the source of things and see that that is desire. That is the source of things. And we can see that that desire, if we don't check it and we don't control it, will result in these consequences that we see externally. And so these are some of the main topics that I talked about in the talk. And if you can recall that, and if you can just remind yourself that we've talked about these things, then that will help that to sink down, and it will help you to remember it a lot better. And then once you remember it, then inquire into the meaning of it, to reflect on it. Oh, what was this talking about? What was that talking about? Is that right? Did I hear that correctly? Bhante referred to this, but I always thought that meant that. What does that mean? And, you know, so to use this inquiring mind, so that you're not just taking everything for granted that's being taught, but then you might be asking, like, what's the relationship between this bit and that bit? And, you know, why did he talk about that story there? Was that just random, or was there some purpose to it? And so you start, when you reflect on it and you ask questions about the teaching in this way, then that again is helping your understanding to grow. So this is Dhammavichaya as it's applied to the investigation inquiry into the teachings. But as I said, Dhammavichaya is also the investigation inquiry into the phenomena, the dhammas, that's occurring in your own mind. And so you have feelings, and you have thoughts, and you have memories, and you have intentions, and you have perceptions, and you have all of these crazy things that's going on in your mind, so many of them. My goodness, how can anybody keep track? So Dhammavichaya is having a look at these and thinking, why is this coming? What's this? This is a memory. Dhammavichaya is able to distinguish. For example, if I hear that sound, I can go, that's the sound of my finger snapping. But then I can go, actually, no, there's a sound, and then there's an idea of my finger snapping. But you can't see my finger snapping. I don't even know if you can hear it really, but you can't see it. Maybe it's something else, right? And so your Dhammavichaya can tell you that, actually, no, I don't hear the sound of a bird. I hear a sound. And in my mind, I think that it's a bird. You see the difference? Yeah. So then naively we think, it's the sound of a bird or the sound of a car. But actually the sound is one thing. The idea of a bird or a car is another thing. And so Dhammavichaya helps us to distinguish these things, understand how our mind is working. So that's just one aspect of how Dhammavichaya works, but it has the sense of senses. Okay, very good. Continuing, so I know I'm conscious that we're going to okay, there's a few questions which I will answer a bit more briefly because I'm conscious that we've got a deadline of coming up in 5 minutes. Is YoNiso Manisikara a form of thinking or reflection or observing the mind in samadhi? It can be either. So it can be a more active process of thinking and reflection, or it can be a more silent process of observation. The thing that has in common is that you're consciously turning your mind to look at the causes of things. So Bhante, if we're infected or sick with COVID or any kind of serious illness, what's the best Buddhist teaching you recommend to recall at that trying time? Because we won't be in a position to recall all that we learn or know. Yes, that's a good point. And often when you're sick, then you're distressed, you're tired, all of these things. You can't turn your mind to all of the teachings and all of these things. But hopefully you can bear in mind one simple thing. And perhaps one simple thing that I would say at that time is just to remind yourself, this too will pass. This is impermanent. And this body is of this nature. And the nature of the body is to get sick. Sometimes the nature of the body is to get better. And that's just how bodies are. So if you can remember that and remind yourself that this is impermanent and this will, then hopefully that can give you some solace when trying to deal with some kind of serious illness. All right, so another couple of questions from Kavi. A bit more about meditative experience when able to observe craving. I don't know if I can actually say a whole lot more than that. It's just an insight. It's just like a moment when you're sitting and meditating and you just see, and you're just like, ah. And it's just like, it's like any other moment. It's like you sit and meditate and you might observe, your feelings, and you've observed feelings 1,000 times. And you observe a thought and, you've observed that 1,000 times. But then this one time, it's like you catch, what's underneath it? And you just catch this glimpse of it. It's really hard to describe, but it's something that you go, that's what the Buddha was talking about. That's that craving. Anyway, on what about parit chanting and preventing and curing diseases? Well, look, I think doing parit chanting is good, and if it gives you some solace and support when you're sick, then I think that's really good. Do I think that you should do parit chanting and doesn't mean you should see your doctor? No, I don't. Please see your doctor and then do some parit chanting. If a Buddhist has contracted COVID, what you should do is listen to the advice of the experts. And I can't say this enough, that it's really important that we pay attention to the people who have devoted years of their life to studying how the body works, how disease works, and how all of these things work. They're the ones who know about it, and we don't know about it. These days, people go on the internet and they go and read a couple of blogs or do these kinds of things or watch a YouTube video, and they think they're doing research. And they say, but I researched this. No, that's not research. That's just farting around on the internet. Research means getting a degree. It means doing a PhD. It means having peer review. It means having people who know what they're talking about actually giving you feedback and telling you why what you're saying is right or what is wrong. That's research, okay? So please don't insult researchers by saying that you're spending a lazy afternoon twiddling around on YouTube videos is research. So please rely on the advice of the experts. We know, of course, experts are not perfect. They're not always going to get it right. They're not always going to give you the same advice. It's true. But on the whole, they're going to give you better advice than you can know just for yourself. I know, if I had a car and it was breaking down, I'd take it to the mechanics, and the mechanic said, well, you need to do this and you do that. I say, okay, you're the expert. And I just let them do their job because they know better than I do. So that's how we should do. And if you contracted COVID, listen to the medical advice and be of good cheer. And just remember that there's really only going to be two outcomes. Either you'll get better or you'll die. So what are you worried about? Okay, very good. Looks like we've probably run out of time, and I think that you were, Kavi, there was going to be another short message at the end here.
Kavla, thank you, Bhante. So just a note on a few other, I know people just would love to continue to listen to you, Bhante, and actually to very shortly, I'm going to share some details on that. So there is a now the upcoming series of Dhamma sermons by Bhante Sujato on the 28th, 29th, and 30th of May. And you will receive the link to that as the same way you receive the link to this. So you have more opportunities to listen and discuss with Bhante Sujato in the upcoming future in celebration of Vesak. I would now like to invite Upeka Veeravardhana from the Inside Meditation Center to speak a few words.
Thank you, Kavi. On behalf of the Insight Meditation Center Committee and all of you who participated in this online sermon, we express our sincere gratitude to Bhante Sujato for kindly accepting our invitation at short notice and for delivering a beautiful and timely sermon, imparting your wisdom on the new normal and YoNiso Manisikara. Bhante, we are aware of all the meritorious work you do and also your invaluable work with Sutta Central. May all your noble aspirations be fulfilled. Much merits to you, Mrs. Deepika Virakon, for assisting us with the smooth coordination of this online sermon from Sydney. Mr. Kavinga Vijay Sekara, we sincerely appreciate your expert moderation of this program, and we wish you continued success in all your Dhamma work. We are grateful to our donors, Upali and Kamala Kapilasena, for sponsoring today's sermon. We appreciate the guidance and support extended by Venerable Bambaragama Somaratana Thero, Chief Incumbent of Sri Jinendra Ramaya, along with the untiring efforts of the IMC committee members for organizing this gift of Dhamma to commemorate Vesak and to invoke merit to all those affected by the pandemic, especially in Sri Lanka. Teruan Saranai. Happy Vesak.
Thank you, Becca. And finally, to conclude today's Dhamma sermon and this meritorious activity, I would like to once again invite Ajahn Sujato for the Punanumodana. Ajahn Sujato.
Okay. Thank you so much for that, Kavi. And I'm just wondering whether you have a regular Punyanamodana form that you use or recitation that you use in your center, or you just want me to just lead with.
Sureka, do you?
Bhante, please go ahead, Bhante. We're happy to have whatever Pinanamodana that you would give us.
Okay. I just say that because I teach with Buddhist communities from many different backgrounds, and so everybody does things a little bit different way. So happy to do it the way that you do it. Otherwise, I'll just say recite some verses for us all.
Of course. Thank you.
Etavata cham he sambhatang punya sampadang sabbe deva namodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cham he sambhatang punya sampadang sabbe bhuta namodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Etavata cha amhehi sambhatang punya sampadang sabbe satta anumodantu sabba sampati siddhya. Akasatha cha bhumakha deva naga mahindhika punyang tang anumoditva chirang rakhantu lokasanti. Devo vasatu kalena sassa sampati hotu cha pito bhavatu loko cha raja bhavatu dhammiko. Akasatha cha bhumatha deva naga mahidhika Punyang tang anumoditva tirang rakhantu sasanang akasatha cha bhumata devanaga mahindika. Punyang tang anumoditva tirang rakhantu desanang akasatha cha bhumata devanaga mahindika. Punyang tang anumoditva tirang rakhantu man paranti.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.
And with that, we would conclude this evening sessions. May the blessings of the Noble Triple Gem be with all of you.